Welcome into the State of the Program. I'm Bobby Burton, joined by Gerry Hamilton and CJ Vogel of On Texas Football. It's time for our weekly program, State of the Program, where we look at big picture items concerning the University of Texas and the football program, other sports as well. We're going to stick to football primarily today, though, brought to you by each and every week, Adam Lowy over at the Lowy Law Firm. We appreciate him. All right, news coming out a little earlier today, but it's something that we've been following. And this sounds odd to even mention it within something like the State of the Program, but we're going to do it. And that is the EA Sports college video game. And here's why we're going to do it. They have to go in, the programmers as well as their editors have to go in and rank the players and give them certain skill sets, etc. And it came out kind of interesting. They released earlier today their top 100 players in college football for the game. Guess how many the Longhorns had? It was a surprisingly low number to me personally. CJ, give folks a sense of where they came out with in the University of Texas.
Yeah, so the top 100 players were released, and of course, folks flocked to see where their favorite teams' players would kind of rank up. Texas only had 2. So I was a bit surprised there. Kelvin Banks was the number 2 overall left tackle with a 94 overall. He was the number 13 overall player in the game. Quinn Ewers, the number 27 overall player in the game, the number 3 overall quarterback behind Shedeur Sanders and Carson Beck, who are 1-2 respectively. I was a bit surprised, right? You know, you're talking about Quinn Ewers, a cover athlete, outside the top 25. I have no issue with, obviously, the third quarterback. We can debate that all you want. But outside the top 25, a bit surprising to me, a 92 overall for Quinn Ewers. So for only 2 Texas Longhorns to be on this top 100, a bit surprising. But at the same time, I think they got it right with who the 2 should have been if there were only going to be 2 Longhorns. So full ranking should come out later this week. But at the same time, I'm excited this game's getting closer. And hey, we're getting a little bit of a glimpse of what to expect from some Texas Longhorns in the game itself.
Hey, Gerry, I tell you what, you surprised with only 2? Anybody you think that should have got – any Longhorns you think should be or would be in the top 100? I mean, Isaiah Bond, by some folks, is a first-round pick.
Right.
That name obviously comes out. Trey Moore, the edge prospect that transferred in from UTSA that had 14.5 sacks last year. Anybody else in your mind that probably should have been in this top 100 or that you could make an argument for?
Well, I think what's interesting is the top 100 now. It's kind of like a mock draft, right? Before the season, and then what does it look like after the season? I'm betting Anthony Hill and Malik Muhammad may be in that at the end of the season. That's kind of the way I'm looking at some of this. And could a Cam Williams with a great season be one of those guys you look back on and say because it is like a mock draft to me. But I think I'll say this. I think Texas has a lot of really good football players that would probably rank 100 to 200 on this list.
Yeah, definitely.
That's the key. I think they might have 5, 6, 7 guys that rank from 100 to 200.
All right. I want to mention this next. I mean, the other thing that was interesting out of it, you get a relative sense of how other people view other players around that Texas is going to play. 2 teams clearly, at least according to this, and I mean, it gives you a sense of where they're at. 2 teams, guys, really heavily talented with more players in the top 100. Georgia with 6, Michigan with 5. Michigan with 5. CJ, take us through the 5 guys at Michigan and where they rank essentially.
Yeah, we'll start with the tandem up front, right? You know, that's Kenneth Grant, that's Mason Graham. Both of them fall into the top 100. Mason Graham is one of the top 10 players in the country. Running back Donovan Edwards, tight end Colson Loveland, they're both in the top 100. Loveland actually sneaks in, I believe, right around the 60 mark area, so firmly in there as well. The big surprise to me, though, I think folks in Ann Arbor will tell you it's absolutely warranted. Will Johnson, the cornerback, number 1 overall player in the game. He was, of course, the MVP, the defensive MVP of the national championship last winter. So folks are very excited for him up in Ann Arbor. EA Sports certainly took note of what he could do on the field as well. He's your number one player in this game before its release, Bobby.
A cornerback there. Georgia had quite a few too, Jerry. What were your thoughts on the guys out of Georgia that are Georgia with actually more than Michigan at 6?
This is why you recruit top 3 classes on average for 8 years in a row if you're Kirby Smart, because they have 6 in the top 100. They probably have 6 more in the top 200. I mean, you're probably looking at double-digit players in the top 200. And why? Some people are like, why does this matter? Well, it does matter because, look, Malachi Starks, one of the best safeties in the country. Mikael Williams, one of the best 5 techniques in the country, right? Oscar Delp hadn't even really, started a couple of games due to injury. Brock Bowers, he's in the top 100. But look at the offensive line for Georgia. 2 interior guard prospects, I believe, is what they really are, that are in the top 100. That's not even counting Ernest Green, who's projected to be a first-round pick, and some of those other guys on that Georgia defensive front, linebackers, and in the secondary. So Georgia has talent everywhere. And like I said, it's a mock draft. What does this look like at the end of the year? Does a London Humphreys, the receiver from Vanderbilt that portaled to Georgia, does he end up being in this list at the end of the year? Because remember how Vlad McConkey came out of nowhere as a walk-on and was an impactful player. So it's fun to look at, but the depth of Georgia and the talent they've assembled through the high school recruiting and the portal is somewhat scary, guys.
Yeah, CJ, I look at it. What about the other teams Texas faces? OU, for example. They've got only 2 on this list, and 2 that I think deserve it, by the way. Danny Stutzman, the linebacker. I love him as a player. I think he's terrific. And then Billy Bowman, the safety that played really well against Texas a year ago. Do they have others that should be in this list? Or are they kind of like Texas where maybe some of their younger guys are on the come a little bit?
Yeah, I was actually surprised to only see 2 from Oklahoma. Kind of similar to how we're talking about being surprised to only see 2 from Texas, right? And I think, again, to that conversation about 101 to 200 to 250 to 300, you're going to see Oklahoma and Texas names scattered everywhere. The 2 that really surprised me, the omissions. One, Texas fans probably won't like hearing this, but Dominic Williams, I thought, should have been in this list, right? He's an all-conference Big 12 guy. He's a guy who's rising up draft boards and is likely to depart after just 3 seasons in college football. Of course, was a freshman All-American at TCU as well 2 years ago. The other one, listen, I think Nick Anderson, the wide receiver.
He's going to be a first-round pick. Totally agree. Going to be a first-round.
That kid is very, very good for what he was able to do as a true freshman, especially after his counterpart, Andrew Anthony, went down for the second half of the season with an ACL. For him to be the one guy that defenses really had to hone in on and kind of say, this guy cannot beat us, and he still was able to beat a number of teams with the deep ball, with the comebacks, with the intermediate routes. That's a blatant omission for me. But those were the 2 that really stood out to me from Oklahoma. At the end of the day, for those 2 guys that they have listed on the defensive side of the ball, and again, Dominic Williams to be in that conversation as an omission, that leans certainly to where I think their favorable side of the ball will be, and that's on defense in 2024.
I wanted to say this: Texas, 18 of the top 100 are on Texas schedule this year. 18 players that made the top 100. I don't know where that will rank amongst teams, but I'm guessing Florida's schedule will have the most.
Yeah, I would say this, Jerry, too. I'm just looking down the list. OU has 2. That's actually the 3rd most Texas faces. Kentucky has 2 as well. Big defensive lineman. We've talked about him quite a bit. But then I look down. Not a single top 100 player from any of the following: Florida, Mississippi State, Vandy, or ULM, or UTSA. So 5 schools with none. In the first game, Texas actually plays one that is, and that's Torrey Holton, the wide receiver out of Colorado State, who ranks 45 overall. As far as A&M is concerned, there's only one guy, Jerry, that makes this list for them, and he's a transfer.
Yeah. Nick Skirton from Bryan High School, went to Purdue, transferred back to Texas A&M in the portal, projected to be an NFL first-round pick. I wanted to point out, too, with Florida, Eugene Wilson, the sophomore receiver, will end up being one of those guys. Whether he is now or at the end of the season, mark that one down. He's a future high NFL draft pick. But for Texas A&M, Connor Weigman, probably due to injury, right? More than talent due to injury. Then, some of those guys, the interesting thing, CJ will have to do a look back on this, is how many guys that transferred out of A&M are actually on that list? Is Walter Nolan on that list? How many guys that have left A&M?
Evan Stewart.
Yeah.
Evan Stewart.
There's actually one note I did want to make, and it's the two fastest players on this roster are 96 and 95 speed ratings. Both of them are wide receivers at Oregon. Obviously, Evan Stewart being one of them.
That's interesting. I look at it, and I'm not a big video game guy. I used to be when I was younger, but I didn't get into the EA Sports game. I was a little older at the time. My thought process is that video games have changed so much that there's a lot more data that goes into them and forethought. So I thought it would be interesting for us to look at this from a relative standpoint overall. We're going to break and go into recruiting here in a second. But I do want to reiterate, Georgia was 6, Michigan with 5, Texas itself with 2, and then Kentucky and OU with 2 each, followed by A&M with 1 and Colorado State with 1, Florida, Mississippi State, Vandy, UTSA, and ULM with none. I wonder, by the way, if Trey Moore stays at UTSA, is he maybe in that category still, because he has such outstanding numbers at a smaller school? I wonder if that may be something to consider. Hey, I want to say thank you to our sponsor before we start talking about some important stuff as it relates to recruiting, and that is our friend Adam Lowy at the Lowy Law Firm. Adam's been with us for more than a year now. We appreciate his sponsorship. Each and every state of the program brought to you by the Lowy Law Firm with more than 20 years experience. You've been in a car wreck, truck wreck, automobile accident of any kind, including ATV or motorcycle. Give Adam and his firm a shout. Reach out to them, loweylawfirm.com. They'll give you a free consultation, no strings attached. Again, loweylawfirm.com. All right, recruiting. Texas at 13 commitments. Longhorns, the latest 2 being Smith-Orogbo and Cade Phillips, both guys that were at the top of their board at their positions. So big-time pickups for Texas. Yet, we're waiting for other shoes to drop now. Hurricane Burrell had a little bit to say about that, changing up some things in Houston. But let's focus on 3 players in Houston real quick, okay? Nick Townsend, the tight end out of Spring Decaney, also a defensive end, as well as Tanook Hines, the wide receiver. They're going to announce on the 15th. Kelshawn Johnson, that's next Monday. Kelshawn Johnson, the wide receiver out of Hitchcock. Hitchcock, for those unaware, right in the path of the hurricane, southern part of Houston, in between Houston and Galveston, really. They still don't have power as of today.
Right.
And so he was expected to announce originally on the 8th. They delayed it to the 10th. Now they're having to push it off even further. Gerry, I want to get your take on those 3 guys specifically.
Yeah, let's start with Nick Townsend because I think he's the one that maybe Texas feels best about right now. We'll see what happens. Announcing on Monday. Texas A&M USC is your main competition there. Caleb Edwards committed to Alabama at tight end. Alabama was telling Nick Townsend he'd be the only tight end they take if he committed there. That obviously didn't happen. They took Caleb Edwards. So this is really Texas A&M USC. Could A&M pull an upset? Here's the question. I think the colleges recruiting Townsend think Texas is in a pretty good spot. I think CJ and I continue to hear that Texas is in a pretty good spot. Now they have to go close it out. It makes a lot of sense for Nick Townsend to go to Texas as a tight end in that offense, seeing what Jatavion Sanders did the last 2 years, what Nyblack will probably do this year. And Townsend's one of the top 100 prospects in the country. Kelshawn Johnson, Tanook Hines, very interesting. It'll be interesting to see which way these recruitments go. I do think Kelshawn Johnson's more conflicted in the last 24 to 48 hours than he was in the week and a half, 2 weeks prior. I think he was an A&M lean, but I think as this decision's gotten closer, after DeCorian Moore goes to Oregon, Steve Sarkisian, Chris Jackson have talked to him multiple times. I think this is more of a conflicted decision right now based on people I've talked to in the last 24 hours. Now, does that mean Texas is going to win out for Kelshawn Johnson? It does not, but I do think he's gone from a pretty strong A&M lean to more conflicted. And that announcement's going to be sometime next week. We just don't know when. Could it be on the 15th as well? We just don't know yet. That's going to be up to Hitchcock. The head coach at Hitchcock is going out of town on a family vacation, so he won't be around next week when Kelshawn announces, should it happen next week. Tanook Hines, total wild card to me, guys. I mean, Notre Dame's recruited him harder than anybody, and that means recruiting Tanook and the family. They've recruited him harder than anybody. USC, I think, has a chance here. His brother plays in Hawaii. There's some West Coast stuff there with the family. Does it mean he's going to USC? No. Texas has had conversations with Chris Jackson's had conversations with Tanook Hines. Will A&M come in an offer late here in the last 3 days before he announces? I don't think he'd go to A&M, but they could muddy the waters. I'll say this. Texas would take a commitment from Kelshawn or Tanook Hines. If one of those guys wanted to commit, they would take the commitment. That I can tell you. Which way these are going to go, I don't think we know right now.
Good stuff, Gerry. I want to add something here that I've got a little news on. Texas, they got caught a little bit with some early commitments going elsewhere. I'm hearing from behind the scenes that they're working on a number of prospects still that people aren't really familiar with, et cetera, and some that have committed elsewhere already. So be aware of that. And we're certainly monitoring that right now as we speak, because I don't think that, we use terms like recruit through the whistle, et cetera. Texas is going to keep recruiting, and it may not be recruit through the whistle. It just may be recruit, period.
Yes.
And keep recruiting and not taking no for an answer. So do I think it's certain players that everybody's thinking about? Maybe, maybe not. The reality of it is Texas isn't going quietly into that good night. All right, CJ, I've got to ask you about offensive lineman Michael Fasusi, big guy up there. Gerry, I'm going to ask you about Nick Brooks. What's the latest on Fasusi right now, the big young man out of Louisville that's expected to make his decision sometime later in the month or next month, but he put out a tweet talking about something big happening this Friday. We don't think that's a commitment, right?
I lean more towards a final 2 or a final 3 from Fasusi, maybe even a firm commitment date coming, later this month or early August before the season begins. Again, that kind of fits the timeline that we believe to be the case for Fasusi. Of course, right now on Texas football believes it's a Texas and Oklahoma battle with A&M kind of sitting right outside. And the Aggies will certainly try to get him on campus once the dead period ends, as will Texas and Oklahoma. But again, I lean a little bit towards Oklahoma in this recruitment. I think that the visits went well at each school. I think Oklahoma kind of suited his, kind of what he likes in a college campus, maybe a little bit more. And they've certainly made him feel welcome when it comes to bringing out the entire staff, some former players, and certainly giving his family the warm treatment up in Norman. Not saying Texas didn't, but that was one of the kind of recurring themes that I've heard about his recruitment since the official visits kind of died down. Again, I think it's Texas and Oklahoma. Right now, I lean just slightly to the Sooners right now.
Got it. Gerry, what about Nick Brooks, big lineman out of Cedar Rapids, Iowa, that Texas is seemingly really made a big move on?
Yeah, I think Texas remains in a good spot for Nick Brooks. He's not expected to announce until September as of right now. I think Texas leads Georgia. USC's third there. Iowa's not in the picture, even though he was a one-time Iowa commitment from Cedar Rapids. But I think Texas, there's some confidence there. He's maintained great communication with Kyle Flood and Steve Sarkisian since that June 14th visit, which was his last official visit. But again, I don't think he's going to announce a decision until September. One thing to watch with him, though, is if a couple other schools take other offensive linemen, I think it could give you a good indicator here coming down the stretch for Nick Brooks. I also want to add to Fasusi. I totally agree with CJ. Not a commitment this Friday. That's going to be late August before the season starts. Michael Fasusi has maybe more fun with the recruiting process than a lot of offensive linemen do. He's going to probably drop, as CJ said, his top list of schools, maybe come back then and do a commitment date as well. But yeah, that won't be a commitment Friday. If it is, that would be a total change up from what people around him have said in the last 24 hours.
Gerry, I got to ask you were just in Jacksonville. Get your final thoughts on the record there of Jamie French. I know you posted the video earlier today of your conversation with him. What were your final thoughts there?
I think Texas is in a really good spot. He's going to probably visit Georgia the last weekend in July officially once the dead period ends. We've wondered who could be Texas competition at the end of the day. I think right now it is Tennessee. LSU's not it. Miami's not it. One of the things with DeCorey and Moore, which was interesting, how these recruitments can be similar. DeCorey and Moore, I think, wanted to get away and do something different. Jamie French isn't going to go to Miami for the same reason as of today. Now, I just think he wants to do something different. Get away, get out of home state. He has a lot of family in Baton Rouge. I don't think it's going to be there. I think Texas is a pretty healthy leader over Tennessee right now. Can Georgia make a push late July? We'll see. August 30th, decision date. That's locked in. That's his mom's birthday. They're already planning for some big things as far as an announcement ceremony for him. And I'm not saying it has anything to do with Texas. I'm just saying that ceremony around his mom's birthday, August 30th, that's going to be a big day for that family. I really like where Texas sits right now with Jamie French.
You were just there, so you would know as well as anyone in that point. All right, a couple other recruiting news and notes that we need to make sure everybody realizes. We have not heard from DJ Sanders, the defensive lineman out of Belleville.
Nobody does.
Nobody has. Out of when he might make an announcement. He's debating between Texas A&M, possibly Michigan as well. Also, Nathan Tillman, he narrowed his choices to Texas, TCU, and Utah. That is the safety out of Mansfield, Timberview. Jonathan Cunningham, the linebacker out of North Crowley, down to Texas, TCU, and Utah, same exact group. And then Michael Terry over at, if you remember, young man out of Alamo Heights in San Antonio, Oregon, now giving chase and apparently making some hay, but the Longhorns still competitive there as well. Interesting group of players right now for Texas, still remaining on the board. Overall, they are at 13 verbal commitments as we speak. All right, guys, that's going to do it for today. We want to say thank you again to our sponsor, Adam Lowy of the Lowy Law Firm. If you've been injured in a car wreck, truck wreck, automobile accident of any kind, reach out to them at loweylawfirm.com. More than 20 years of experience helping Texans get what they deserve. That's loweylawfirm.com. All right, Gerry, CJ, any final thoughts before we get going?
Yeah. Dalen McCutcheon also announces July 13th, Florida State, USC, Texas, kind of three talked about there. CJ's mentioned this. Steve Sarkisian, Chris Jackson have talked to McCutcheon and his family, just like they have Kelshawn Johnson and Chinook Hines this week. I think one important thing I want to add, of those three guys, Texas would take a commitment from one of those guys. If one of those guys stepped up and said, I want to go to Texas, I do think they'd accept the commitment from one of those three guys. Where they are on the board, I think is an interesting conversation, but I do think that Texas would accept the commitment from one of those three guys. Would they accept the commitment from two? I'm not so sure.
Interesting. All right. That's going to do it for this week's State of the Program. For CJ Vogel and Gerry Hamilton, and thank you to our sponsor, Adam Lowy. I'm Bobby Burton. Hook 'em.